Welcome to Uncorked, a cult wines podcast where we take you behind the scenes of the fine wine market. I'm Tom Gearing, your host and CEO of Cult Wines, and I'm joined, as ever, by my trusty sidekick and co-host, Jay Stevenson. How are you today?
Very well, very well. Feeling festive.
I know, this is officially our Christmas episode, I think.
Exactly.
Getting into the spirit of things.
We won't let on how many doors of the Advent calendar we've opened.
But we are marching mercilessly towards Christmas Day. And we are very excited to have a very special guest with us today. We are joined by Victoria Daskal. She has just done everything when it comes to wine, and we're super excited to hear more about her story. She's a wine writer, she's an educator, a WSET instructor, and that for regular listeners of yours, you'll know how much WSETs come up, so it'll be interesting to talk to you about that. A global traveler, which is important, and you're a creative mind behind curated tastings and experiences that I think, I don't know if these are your own words, bring history, culture, and people together, which I think is a really nice way of surmising it, because I think really that's what wine is supposed to do. And you've spent the past 15 years exploring wine, and it's taken you to various different countries and wine regions. I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. We're very thankful for you to be here. So welcome to the podcast.
Yes, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you both so much for having me. It's really a joy and a pleasure to just speak to you both and share what I love about wine with you both.
Absolutely, yeah, and we can't wait to hear more. As you know, listeners, each episode we unpack the key trends, the insights and talking points, and of course we're joined with industry experts as well as ourselves. And I suppose the theme today is kind of unpicking and unwrapping, how people fall in love with wine, from their first glass to maybe that first, memorable great bottle. And actually, it's a question we ask a lot of our guests sometimes, like, what was that moment? What was that light bulb moment for you with wine? And I think it's interesting because it's almost like everyone has that such a visceral memory of that moment. And of course, as we mentioned, with your travel and experience with regions and different places that you've been to, we're really looking forward to hearing some of your tips, let's say, around wine regions and places like that. But maybe as a kickoff, because it kind of is the theme of today, what was your first great bottle? What was that light bulb moment for you?
Okay, so people have asked me that recently, so I have something to mind already, but I have to say it wasn't the great bottle. It was the moment that really kind of woke me up. And it was before I knew anything about wine. I was actually still a student in Montreal studying, economics, psychology, nothing to do with wine yet. But I was in Montreal, which was a city that is very cosmopolitan, very international, French influence all the way through. And I was actually sitting in a wine bar with one of my best friends, and we ordered a glass of Penfolds, which, I love Penfolds. It's not my necessarily favorite wine, but it's a wine that's very expressive. And it was, not a top wine, but a wine that had so many aromas that just...
Do you remember which label it was?
Do you know what? I don't, actually. Yeah. It wasn't Grange, let's just say that.
No. Shiraz, maybe?
Yeah, it was definitely a Shiraz blend. It's like a Shiraz Cab blend. But it was because it was for a novice, it was straight away full of just these incredible layers.
How long ago are we talking?
We're talking like 20 years
and
ago.
how old were you there at that moment in time?
Now you're gonna
sorry. Apologies.
Your birthday was yesterday. No,
you could do the same. You could do the same to me later. It's fine.
I can just say I think I was like 21. I don't know. It was a long time ago, but I didn't know anything about wine.
But you knew nothing about wine.
Literally nothing. But I swirled the glass, and suddenly I actually could.
How did you know to swirl the glass?
I watched TV.
Okay.
No, but I just swirled the glass, and I could see that, I feel that there were aromas like blueberry pie and, cassis and spice and toast and just really big aromas that I'd never, ever even thought. I never thought about that in wine. Like 21-year-old, you don't just think about wine. But anyway, that was the moment that I actually got very curious about wine as, something to pursue and learn about. And that stayed with me. And I think from that point, I started to look for wine tasting opportunities and learning, and kind of picked up a few books and started to, just investigate it a bit more. So it wasn't the wine necessarily. It really was just that moment of like being a complete beginner, realizing there's something special in a glass, and it's it's not the same thing you don't necessarily get from every alcoholic drink.
Do you think there are 21-year-olds out there in the world today having that same experience?
Yeah, I do. I think
less than there were before, or hopefully the same.
I think it's happening, but it's we know that young people aren't drinking maybe as much as we did before, but I think now more than ever there's a curiosity for not just what's in the glass, but like the people behind that wine and who made it and the story. So I think young people can be engaged, but because of curiosity and kind of thinking there's a lot more in the glass than just the alcohol. It's going to take a lot of different factors to get them engaged, but I think it's happening.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well the way that you've put that, because obviously having had that moment with that glass and the way you described it, there's a lot of the factors that I'm sure we'll come on to discuss about younger generations and getting into wine. It's just interesting that you sort of answered that very question at the young age of 21 without any pre-existing wine knowledge of, can you tell the difference between a wine that's more than just a table wine and a wine that's really been made with the levels of winemaking skill. So I think just anecdotally there with that story, I think you've almost answered the question that it can often just be as simple as that, just having that experience with a greater wine than maybe you've had before. Yeah.
I mean, on that theme, maybe I can ask you a question, Victoria, just to get your opinion. Obviously, we're in the industry, right? So if you think about it from the perspective of, we want as many people to have that spark moment, when you had that Penfolds wine. And then I suppose for a lot of people, they can have the spark moment, but the next bit's actually quite hard as well. Where do you go after that spark moment?
Yeah.
I get that question a lot, kind of like, oh, I know I like wine, but I don't know what the next step is. For, obviously being an industry, we want as many people to kind of gravitate up the scale as possible. But they're probably two of the key points of making sure that there's a moment where the spark can happen, and then ensuring there's a way for someone to then know what to do next once they've got that curiosity. From your perspective, which are the two of the hardest challenges for the industry today?
I think, well, look, I can say from my point of view that after I had that spark, it ignited a curiosity. And so when I finished university, I moved back to Boston, and actually, besides working full time, I started taking wine courses. And I think that's the next point, is maybe trying to have a little bit more of an education on the topic that you're interested in. And it doesn't have to be WSET. It doesn't have to be like a very formal qualification, but it's just got to be an environment where you can ask questions and you have someone that is equally passionate and can share their life experience with wine. And I was very lucky. So my next kind of stepping stone was landing with a wine educator who was just incredible. I mean, he had studied history at university. So that's when he started he taught his courses through a point of like the history and culture and geography and religion. And at that point I was like, that's it. I'm done. I've got the bug. I'm never turning back.
It's almost like you landed on finding like a mentor.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he would have considered himself that, but it's true. I really consider him as like that pivotal person that unlocked a world for me, that I was like, oh, that's it. Wine is everything. And so I took all of his courses that year, learned a lot. But
where were these courses? Sorry, these were
in Boston. These were like nothing.
Just privately run courses.
Yeah, they were just through like an adult education program in the evening. So my day job was so dull. It was actually in finance initially, and it just wasn't for me. So in the
we like finance and wine on this podcast, but yeah,
I ditched the finance and went straight for wine. And anyway, those courses kept me, enjoying that kind of life. And after a year of taking all the courses I could, I knew that was it. I'm not turning back now, and actually moved to France after that. And that was the next point. Yeah. So again, back to your question, how do people get to these points? I mean, not everybody wants to work in wine, that's for sure. Yeah. But people might want to pursue a hobby, interest, like learn as much as they can, even just as a consumer, right?
Yeah.
But I would still say go to courses, go to classes, join, tasting groups together and learn, keep learning.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And obviously in your career today, and some of this, obviously I read off a whole list of stuff that you've been involved in and done. Like, do you feel like is that kind of like a part of the DNA of the things that you try and do in terms of helping people on those journeys?
Sorry.
In terms of exploration, like, obviously whether it's the tastings you host, the experiences you've had in your career, do you see that as kind of like a driving force for what you're doing, like helping make it easier for people to go on that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my probably biggest passion about the way I work in wine is to help share my knowledge, and just whether it's through a tasting or an article or whatever, like a wine course that is maybe more formal, but still I want to do it in as much of an engaging way as possible to keep people curious. Because you can work in wine in so many ways, right? You can be the one making it or selling it or serving it, and
or just enjoying
it.
Yeah.
But let's say you're working in it. My passion is to actually teach and share about it, definitely. And I think then I end up bringing people along. Sometimes they don't realize they're going to end up working in it too after a while. Yeah, somehow.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued by your career. So after you had this moment in Boston, you then moved and relocated to France, and then you dedicated yourself career-wise to wine at that point.
Well, so no, that was my ticket in was actually just to teach English at a lycée. So it was like my best friend from Boston found this program where they were hiring people to teach at lycées at primary school, secondary school. And they were just 12 hours a week. So we had a lot of time outside of that. It was my way in to live in France. And outside of those 12 hours, I got involved working actually a little bit on a vineyard. I was in the south of France, so a little bit on a vineyard. Also working with a gentleman from England who was actually operating this wine sales company selling wine to yachts. We were in Cannes, actually, in the south of France. So selling wine to yachts that were coming into the port and wanting to restock. So that was really, really interesting because I had no idea how to sell wine, and I had just did like this deep dive of like go into it, go and knock on and talk to the the captain or the chef.
So walk around the marina.
My first wine I sold was actually a case of Bordeaux, Roc de Cam, and it was nice. I had no idea anything about Bordeaux, but I just just found a way to sell it, Yeah. Anyway, so it was just great. Like I was just really getting like slam dunked into wine, just by all these opportunities, and I was just taking it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice. And then how did you, what was your next step after that? Because obviously you've gone into the more journalistic element, I suppose, with wine. Was that your kind of next port of call?
I mean,
were you always kind of passionate about writing and that side of things anyway? Or
the writing came a little later. As basically after that year in France, I had my teaching kind of opportunity ended. You have a 1 year to do it. But I knew I wasn't going back to my old job, my old life. So I needed to stay and actually make the whole wine journey a little bit more official. So I actually applied to do a wine master's in France, and there is this program which is part of the OIV. So it's an international organization of wine and wine. It's sort of like the United Nations of wine, but they also offer in there somewhere there's a master's program that you can do. And I found out about it and applied, and I did that the following year, which was 11 months of just straight travel around the world. So you go to 45 wine regions around the world, 23 countries. And we were a really tight group, but we were 16 people from around the world. So it's like you could make a documentary about that, actually.
Yeah.
It was such an incredible year.
And what was the size of group who were doing? You all did it together at the same time?
16. And we were all different backgrounds. Some of them were sommeliers, some of them were young. We were all quite young, and there was people who were maybe inheriting land or inheriting a wine business, so they were kind of being sent by their families to go and get a bit of an education first. Some of us were working, just different, like importing different backgrounds.
Were you aware that was kind of the makeup of what the course was, being around the world in that fashion?
That was very appealing. It was not like an academic course where you're sitting in the classroom and studying for exams. It was much more like field work. Like we're going to the vineyards, asking the questions, learning, and at the end of those 11 months you have to complete also an internship and then also write a thesis. I mean, my only regret is that when I did the course, I didn't know that much about wine. And when I think back to it, I think, God, I really had some amazing opportunities, but I just didn't appreciate them because I was such a novice still. Now, when I look back on it, I think, oh, wow, we met some incredible people. And it was through that course that I started to write about what I was doing, because I thought this is nice to actually visit these vineyards and like walk. We were in Oregon and China and Mendoza, so many places. Yeah. So I started to kind of blog it. And my school director said, "Oh, looks like you're interested in wine writing. Let me connect you with someone." And he sent an email to Jancis Robinson here in England and said, "I have a student who's interested in wine writing. Could you give her some help or like suggest anything?"
That's a good intro.
It was a gold intro. It was the
Great
intro of my life, actually. Yeah. And she said, "Yes, you can write for my website for free." but I will publish it. But it was so much more valuable than that, because she actually helped me understand how to write about wine and how to ask questions and how to be more measured. I was a lot more of an enthusiastic American, and she was like, you know what, you got to be a little bit more, measured and balanced, and not take everything for, you got to really ask the right questions. And she was really, really good about kind of creating that craft of wine writing in me. So that was really
not taking everything at face value.
Yeah.
We often have that problem when we go to Bordeaux every year to taste a new vintage.
Answer.
They're like, this is a classic vintage.
Exactly.
Like, oh, every year is a classic vintage. That's interesting.
The market is guilty of that in many ways, right? I think that's just kind of the rhetoric that builds, and it's hard to. I think one thing that's always struck me with Jancis, if we were to cover, critics and how they write, and I would say that it's not uncommon to speak to people more and more year over year where they find her way of writing to be actually now probably one of the better critics to get that balanced view, to get that kind of really cutting through and like honest opinion. So yeah, I mean, I think that's I mean, like you said, one of the best introductions you could have had, I think, given if you were maybe a bit more sort of flamboyant and sort of positive maybe around the edges of things. But I think her words now are, really consistently have always been giving that balance to things, which I think is really helpful. It's easy to keep following critics that are giving superlatives over superlatives, and
inflated scores.
Exactly.
She's so measured. She does not, mess around and over enthuse when it's not warranted, right?
For sure.
When you were doing your wine writing, like, was there a particular area that immediately interested you? Was like an area of focus for you at all? Or?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I still don't know. I'm still figuring that out.
Okay.
And it's sort of following the story, and what I learned actually from her as well, but just from practice, is kind of keeping maybe having an idea of what you're going to cover, but also being open to like how that story might change significantly the more you talk to people about it. And then you might pick up a better story because you've talked to like the neighbor who said, actually, did you know about this happening? And then, and sort of just kind of keeping a very open look. And I mean, I now like to, I do a lot of work for Decanter now. I worked for World of Fine Wine. So writing different ways, like profiles on important people, the way regions have been changing. But actually, because this goes back to maybe more what I've really become more passionate about, is not just wine as just the wine, but actually wine as the product of our culture. And I love to combine wine with history and wine with, literature and just other ways, because actually, even after all the studying, and I, love wine education, I actually still think like normal people don't need to know all those details, and they just don't care. And I don't think that's going to be the way that we're going to enthuse the next generation by learning about rootstocks and clones and
that's
all
like
things.
The end of the journey, right?
No,
Wait, I mean,
even not
even for everyone.
No one needs to know. Like, unless you're like literally
unless you want to, right? At the very end of your
really need to know, you'll find out. But I don't think at like a dinner party anyone needs to know that, or will remember that. And I think it's just going to come across as like you're showing off because you happen to know this clone. But
sure, and there's a lot of that in the wine world. I was going to say, just sort of segueing from that a little, you've obviously organised some fantastic experiences and tastings, and we've covered your kind of memorable moment for your first bottle of great wine. And what would be your most memorable experience that you've created for your audience, and like where was it, and why was it so memorable?
That's probably a harder question than even the first wine, but I think generally I've had a lot of memorable ones. A few were when I worked for another company. I did a few events that were, I still can't believe I did them. Like one was with a professor from Oxford, Professor Charles Spence, and he was doing a study with his students on kind of cross-modal sensory kind of studies, where he was seeing, can music influence our appreciation of wine? And so he came in and did a study on different like bass and heavy sounds and light sounds and frequencies and all these different kinds of audio influences, and how that plays with what tastes better when you're listening tasting difficult to even explain this. I can't believe I got involved with that. But essentially what that culminated in is a tasting where we had fine wines from around the world paired with the London Symphony Orchestra playing different kinds of classical music. And the tasting was basically this live...
Was it a blind tasting?
It wasn't blind. No, they knew what we knew what we had, and it was all quite classic, like Champagne, Chablis, Sauternes, Bordeaux, Burgundy. It was all very classic wines, pretty fine wines, but they all had different elements on the palate. So whether it was like high acid and light and fine, or more heavy, rich, tannic, like low. And again,
and they tried to pair the music.
The science of it, I don't get it actually still, but I really found like it was like a pinch me moment when there was like the live symphony orchestra, this Oxford professor and his students and the wines and people in this live, room just enjoying that and tasting it and really finding this kind of interesting collaboration. That was like a once in a lifetime thing. But since then, I've done tastings that were a little bit more maybe low key, but still interesting, like combining things like, for example, wine and literature. And I really like taking a book like A Movable Feast by Hemingway. And if you read this memoir, it's 1920s Paris, all the writers and painters. And he's really specific about the kind of wines he drank. So it's not a wine book, but if you love wine and you read it, you will recognize so many villages and kind of name checks like Cruz and everything. And so you can read it and almost like extract a wine list from that book. And then, which is what I did. And so I just produced a wine tasting based on those wine styles.
Amazing.
So like Sancerre and Chablis and certain villages in Burgundy. And so they're no longer the same vintages, obviously, but it'll be the wines that, he would have drunk. And then reading out the passages of how he described them and who he was with. A lot of them, he was drinking them with F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, just really interesting to think about those people enjoying those wines. And so, I like those kind of moments where it's not about the wine and food. It's really about wine and like
wider
culture.
Connections that you may not have even thought of. Yeah. I mean, that plays into the whole kind of, the hugely interesting for a lot of people. I mean, obviously, Tom, studied history at university. The whole history element to wine is fascinating to a lot of people. So I think, to your point, you can almost kind of pull at these different things if someone's really big into their music and pulling on that string of their interest that would maybe take them down a wine tangent they hadn't thought of. I think that's a really interesting way to think about not just the more obvious, sort of face value ways to kind of engage people into wine, from eureka moment to where to buy it to how to read into wine. It's more a case of, okay, well, what are your other passions? What do you think to connect with wine? Because a lot of the time when you enjoy wine, it's so much more about the sharing, the experience. How, that's what can often shape your memory of a wine more so than the actual wine in the glass, right? So I think that's really interesting. Yeah,
you speak to a lot of people that go to on trips to wine regions and they come back waxing lyrical about this wine. They bought a few cases and they're like, it was weird when I got back to London or to New York or whatever. I opened the bottle and it just
wasn't quite the same.
Didn't taste quite the same. No. I was like, I think I know why.
Often,
exactly. Yeah. On a Tuesday
Sunny
night,
beach holidays,
Tuesday night after work,
after
you've just put the kids down to bed and you open a bottle. It's not quite the same as when you were,
definitely not.
Young, free, and single on a beautiful trip during, some beautiful vistas in the wine world. But one thing I picked up on that you said around kind of this scientific experiment around sound and wine was your skepticism around kind of the science behind it. One thing it just triggered in my mind was just your opinion around one of the more controversial winemaking techniques I think a lot of people talk about today, which is biodynamics. A lot of people talk about kind of obviously the organic, biodynamic, natural wines. Obviously, we know there's these movements around here, some really dedicated, people around natural versus non, and what does that really mean? It's a bit of a grey area in terms of the definition, but clearly it's quite a difficult thing to prove scientifically, especially biodynamics. What's your opinion, given your extensive experience of regions you've traveled to, winemakers you've met who've probably got completely different philosophies to each other? I mean, how do you find the science versus the art of those elements?
I don't know if it's, I don't think you can scientifically prove the benefits of it, but I think if you step back and look at it holistically and see what the benefits are, there's a little problem is that biodynamics, firstly, it's not a lot of people understand it. And I think it gets kind of wrapped up with natural wine, but it doesn't have to be. It's actually entirely separate. It's something that's happening in the vineyard versus the natural wine that's happening more in the winery. And again, it's an ethos with natural wine. Biodynamic, I think a lot of people would actually be surprised at how many wineries are operating biodynamically. They're just not announcing it because they maybe don't want to be associated with that kind of wine style, which is like, maybe a little more funky and a little bit more witchcraft, whatever. But like, there's a lot of very serious producers who are working that way. They just don't talk about it because they want to really just work on the land, the soil, the overall biodiversity in their vineyard, which actually probably I don't know the science, but I know that scientifically it is a healthier soil. It is going to be a healthier soil. So then if you
it's kind of like a subset of organic, right? In terms of how you treat the vineyards, the viticultural process.
Yeah. So in order to be
but in terms of the lunar cycle, like how much do you think that can affect?
I think so. I mean, we know that the moon cycle affects the tides, affects the water. So of course, plants being made up of water, it's going to influence, how effective are the treatments that you're putting on them around the time of year. I mean, this does go back to, farming for millennia. It's not like a new thing. It's just that someone decided to actually turn it into more of a science, a study, Rudolf Steiner. So I don't think it's witchcraft. No, I think it's a really good thing. I don't think everybody needs to do it, but I think those that do, you can see the results in the quality of the grapes. I do believe that. But it's difficult to do it at every price point because obviously it reduces your yield.
Massively, yeah. I mean, obviously there's been big, bastions in particular in Bordeaux. Ponce Canet suffered massively when almost losing an entire harvest for being that. And no, because also in recent years it's been the mildew, and obviously they can only treat it with the copper sulfate, and that palm are affected by that as well. But I think in Bordeaux, the real difficulty of Bordeaux is the size of the vineyards. When you're doing kind of organic or biodynamic farming or viticulture, it's very difficult to do it over large vineyard sizes. I think as soon as you get to like 50 hectares plus, and you hear that from like Chateau Margaux, Chateau Palmer, multiple times. It's kind of like we endeavour to be organic. We endeavour to try and follow biodynamics, but the reality is, volume with this size of vineyard, it's just not practical sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing actually, not to be so dogmatic about it. And like sometimes the paperwork is just a show, but really, like if your heart and your mind is in the right place, like you want to treat it with respect, minimize the chemicals, then that's going to show. You don't need to have the proof of certification, but I just think that some producers maybe are put off by thinking that if they commit to it, they can never go back and spray in a worst case scenario, and that for that reason I think it's not worth doing.
And also maybe feeling like peers maybe are just using that as a stamp of approval for means of actually not necessarily wanting for the best with it. It's like a lot of these things really in wider walks of life, where it's like, is it just the ticking the box that you're achieving, or is it really just, and that probably goes back to what you said about a lot of the producers that are and have been practicing organically for decades and centuries without needing to actually vocalize it, because they just think,
it's just a way of life.
Want it, a way of life, and a guide as well.
But if you take a step back from, as you said, some of the more controversial elements of it, what are the core pillars? The core pillars are not using chemicals and pesticides in the vineyard, having a very sort of hands-on viticulturalist approach to tending the vines and harvesting,
bringing life into the vineyard,
bringing life into promoting life, it. Not obviously not using tractors, using horses. All of these
also
elements.
Finding best practice for your grape on that.
Emphasizing biodiversity. But the core pillars of biodynamic viticulture, I think, promote better quality products in the end, right? Where do you stand on the whole natural wine thing?
I love it, actually. I love it. I'm not like a fanatic about it. It's not the only thing I drink for sure, but I'm curious about it. And in fact, I want to go to the big natural wine tasting happening in February. You might have heard about it. It's La Dive Bouteille. Have you heard of this? It's in a cave in the Loire. I mean, it's almost like a rave more than a wine tasting, but you have to like turn up at the door, have your 10 euros of cash, walk in, get a cigarette and a glass, and just walk around the caves and taste wine, which is produced by all the, the top kind of natural
Sounds like
wine.
my sort of place.
Well, let's go. You know, I mean, so it's like the 200 plus producers from the Loire, Savoie, Jura, you know, Beaujolais. They're all there. Plus some foreign producers come as well. And so they do it in this kind of labyrinth of caves in the Loire region. So it's really it's interesting because it's so unofficial. Like, it's not like the London Wine Fair. White tablecloths and trestle tables and everything. It's not like that at all. It's much more down to earth. Really, literally, you're underground.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a bit more underground, literally,
and you know, and it invites like kind of art, like a very much more like, you know, art and music and food, and like it's a bit more fun, which to me also captures like the love of natural wine. It's like it's fun. It's not necessarily fussy and pretentious. It's not. I wouldn't say it's the kind of wine that.
That's interesting. See, it's almost like you see the natural wine scene almost like emblematic of that.
Of the style itself.
Right.
Yeah. It should not be overanalyzed and, you know, held up to like, does it pass every test on flaws and this and that? It's like, personally, I don't like some of the flaws that come through with natural wine, especially when it's been shipped across the world. It doesn't like. If it's got no sulfur added at all, it can be really, you know, variable. And I'm not a fan of some of the, you know, flavors that can develop. Some people are really tolerant of them. I'm not as much. But if it comes through and it's fresh and it's got this incredible like purity and life in it, they can be some of the most exciting wines ever.
Yeah,
they're just the opposite of, you know, these kind of industrial Coca-Cola style wines. You know, it's much more. It's a different kind of thing. But I agree that it can be really annoying when you're opening up bottles that just constantly surprise you and maybe like they're not kind of fresh.
Flawed or
they're flawed or something's not quite right. And also the bottle variation between them is more significant. So generally, I love it. I'm still learning about it myself. I'm still going to the tastings when I can.
But when you say you love it, like it kind of sounds like to me, the way you describe it is almost you love the scene as much as... But maybe your love for the wines are a little bit more... on the balance because of some of the things you mentioned.
No, I feel like there's a little bit of an unpredictability. But you know, you're not quite sure what you're gonna get, which is also okay. I don't mind that either. I just think sometimes, you know, you're hosting a tasting and it's based around natural wines. It's possible some of them are gonna be funky and not, you know, to everyone's palate.
I think massively that's like that for me in the weirdest way around. I think there's a lot of this in the market. There's kind of creates. And even people that you speak to that love natural wines and they kind of do so with such a vehement, you know, flag of I only like natural wines. But I do think in a weird way, full circle, that can actually become quite an interesting on-ramp into the rest of the world of wine, because actually you'll start to gain that appreciation maybe for the variation that you get because of the way they're made. Okay, well, what's the next step forward from there, where it's just maybe more the organic practices of like certain producers, maybe certain varietals of grape. So I think actually in a weird way around, rather than the two kind of markets maybe somewhat butting heads in some respects, I think I found that, you know, particularly when I was in Brooklyn and in New York, you know, there's a massive wine scene there for natural wines, and it's very much okay. Well, we don't like drinking normal wines, but then I think equally when when we've come from a world where what was pre-existing before that, sort of go back the last few decades, is this is a Chardonnay, this is a over oak Chardonnay that everyone is then knows as that being that, and I think the whole excitement of natural wine is more about the experience of it all being a bit more different and broken.
It's almost like the people within that scene kind of pigeonholes themselves into like, well, I can't look at anything outside natural wine.
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't
it? And it's a shame for sort of like, you know, a lot of those elements you mentioned culturally like resonate like with me in terms of that combination of kind of, you know, being a bit more casual, a bit more stripped back, like, you know, the interaction with like music and art and wine and food and, you know, that being kind of the kind of energy of the scene. And you kind of want that to kind of infect the more stuffy side of the scene as well.
It's great that both exist, you know, and you don't need to necessarily be in one or the other. You can kind of move between. I like what you're describing in Brooklyn. I recognize that. You've seen that around the world sometimes, and I think it's a shame. But I think, you know, natural wine, there's no strict definition necessarily. No. Like, I think it can be, it's like a sliding scale of what. But what appeals to me is that, you know, when you do come across producers who are in that world, there's a kind of genuine, authentic wine, you know, using grapes that are maybe indigenous to their region. Thinking that I think every kind of era in wine is almost like a reaction to what's just been happening, and someone's reacting.
Much like politics.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that's fascinating. I really do think that's such a big area that I hadn't even thought of as much, is to almost use this like new feverish energy for the new of natural wine and actually start to just cross-pollinate that into a lot of the things that maybe are too stuffy, too sort of dated perhaps in the more traditional world of wine. Because
I think where those two worlds are colliding is a little bit on the collector side of things, because I was in we did a wine dinner in Frankfurt last week, and one of the questions was like, oh, what do I think about natural wines from a collection investment perspective? And I was like, well, actually, some of the wines in terms of just pure price appreciation, they've gone up the most in the last decade, are actually natural wines. Pierre Auvernoy comes to mind, Ganavat from Jura, but also in Burgundy, Jean-Yves Bizot, one of the biggest proponents of, natural wine, Domaine Prix-Rock, just names straight, coming up like right at the top of the collector spectrum, and new names that are coming along like Tino Cuban and others within different regions. But I think it's interesting because that kind of friction we were talking about between kind of like the natural wine scene and then the kind of the more stuffier side of things, that is where the two worlds are colliding a little bit, because these wines are fetching £2,000-3,000 a bottle in auctions. Wines from Jura as a region's probably been the biggest benefactor of the natural
corn wine lab, isn't it?
Like Domaine de Miroir, for example. Like you're paying over £1,000 a bottle for the Pinot and the Chardonnay if you can find it, or the Savagnin. Like these wines are now at the level of more expensive than Bordeaux first growths, and so you can start to kind of see this coalescing and this kind of coming together of those two worlds. And we talked about biodynamics, and like the most famous proponent of biodynamic wine in the world for me is Domaine Loire. Lalubis Loire introduced it in the late 80s when no one had really thought or heard about it. And you look at the quality, you look at the impact that her viticultural approach has had on the quality of the wines since she took over the domain in 88. And in the last 10, 15 years, like you have to say she's probably making the best wines in the world. But again, actually, if you think about it from outside of the stuffy spectrum and just think about it from a kind of natural, organic, biodynamic movement, like she very much follows a lot of those core kind of processes that a lot of people look towards in those types of wines. So it's interesting to see how those worlds kind of work alongside each other, because they are kind of generating these kind of collectible trophy wines from this completely new scene.
I also think, to your initial point of how does the next kind of generation of drinkers come in, I think natural wine is probably a more natural way to get in, because of the wine bars, because of the parties, because of the even like the funky cool labels are more appealing and interesting. And I'm not talking about the real like collector pricing. I'm talking more like vin de soif, like easy drinking stuff, but eventually they'll wind up going up and seeing who the real legends are there as well. So I do think that is the area that might attract and then see who comes through.
I often find when like some of the big names in natural wines, they're not cheap.
Yeah,
like natural wines aren't really that cheap, are they? In the grand scheme of things,
because it is a game of what Mother Nature gave you and what you could put out, on the other end. So I think with volumes lower, it's very labor intensive work because you're not relying on chemicals. Definitely, and smaller scale producers, and also then they do get a cult following actually, and so they can command a higher price. So you're right, they're not cheap, but I don't think young drinkers always have to be drinking cheap wine. I think they just like wines with personality, a story, a point of view, that's interesting for them.
And maybe for our listeners at home, because there's obviously an area you have a lot of expertise in, is there kind of 2 or 3 names of wines to look out for that are kind of easily accessible, not the crazy ones we just mentioned in terms of price point?
Actually, well, look, one comes to mind, like I was picturing her as I'm talking about it, is Judith Beck from Burgenland in Austria. And actually, in fact, the entire area of Burgenland is like a hot spot for natural wine producers, and they have a name for themselves. It's called the Penobile Group. And it's like I think it's 8 producers that really they kind of rise together by helping each other. They helped each other convert from organic to biodynamic. They help each other by just sharing practices. They go to trade fairs together. It's like a real strong collective of producers who are all organic, biodynamic, natural, really high quality wines, but it's all like Austrian grapes, like Zweigelt, Blaufränkisch, but just incredible quality. So I would say if you're, looking to get into it, the prices are probably affordable. They're not, crazy.
What sort of price point are we talking about?
Like anything from like £15 to £35. Like for Judith Beck wines from Sparkling.
Judith Beck,
yeah.
Spelled B-E-C-K?
B-E-C-K, yeah. Amazing wines. One of my favorites, actually. Yeah. So
Any other names outside of Austria that come to mind? Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm actually just writing this down. I'm taking notes for later. I'm just like,
let me think. I mean, of course, in Beaujolais, there's like La Pierre. I love La Pierre. Yeah. In the Loire, there are many. I can't like sit and name everybody.
No, of course.
It's gonna be.
I think that's been really insightful. Thank you. Now let's. You mentioned the game being played by the producers, so I think we should maybe try and play our own game. We often enjoy a game, don't we, Tom?
We do.
And I'm going to host this game. So we're going to call this game Wine Fact or Wine Myth. And it's going to be a fast-paced, fun and myth-busting round.
Okay.
And I'm going to kind of read out a few statements that we kind of know to be commonly made in the market.
All of these look quite subjective to me.
Well, it's part of the reason for the game.
So I have to answer myth.
Both.
Or
well,
fact
you and Tom are going
to
decide whether you think these are kind of myth or fact.
Do we need to
or
explain
a bit
our
of both?
Answer?
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah, I think so.
It's not like the weakest link. No one's going to be asked to leave the room if any answers are wrong. So
can I make a phone call?
Don't rule that out. But let's first start with, which I think is kind of on topic from where we've headed with the conversation. Screw caps mean cheap wine.
Myth.
Myth.
Okay. Tom, would you like to give us a reason as to why you think that's a myth?
I think the use of corks at the moment is a lot around prestige and a lot of old traditional wine markets and producers feeling like they could never leave having a cork closure. I think if you look at New World regions, a lot of them are almost entirely screw cap.
New Zealand
in particular. And like one of my favorite Pinot Noirs in the world is Felton Road.
Yeah.
Which is an incredible wine. The other thing I'd say is a lot of the big names that I know have been bottling under screw cap for the last 20 years as testing. Chateau Margaux being one of them has been bottling under screw cap since 2001, I believe. Just for their own tests, experimenting. So look, there's a desire because if you can eradicate some of the issues with corks and oxidation, I think that a lot of people would want to go there. But I think one of the things that's unknown for age-worthy wines is with a screw cap, you are very much completely, almost entirely limiting the exposure to wine to oxygen. Whereas with cork, a little bit of oxygen can still get through the cork closure. So over time, they do mature, and that's really the unknown. So I think the big change in terms of the sort of prestige wines moving to cork closures when there's probably more knowledge around that. But there's hundreds, thousands of amazing wines that are under screw cap, and it absolutely does not mean that it's not a good wine.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. No, I think definitely New Zealand is a perfect example of a country that's fully committed to screw cap at every price point. Yeah. So for sure, that's a great example of of course, quality comes under screw cap. But also, I don't think every wine needs to be aged. And as you're saying, the cork can allow for that. Even screw cap actually allows a little bit of oxygen transmission if you get the right setting. But let's say you're not looking for that. There's many wines that are destined to be drunk straight away, like a great Gruner Veltliner from Austria, for example. It can be under screw cap, that's fine, and it can be a phenomenal wine. Yeah,
it strikes me that it's another one of these many topics that is actually weirdly feeds back into this whole world of how do people get into wine, what are the different ways of doing so. I think clearly there's been a part driven by the weather and the climate change, but a big movement from a lot of regions to try and sort of maybe freshen a bit of their, you look at Italy, look at Bordeaux, how they're sort of more commonly now trying to appeal with a wine profile that's more approachable when younger, right? So I think, this whole kind of testing and cross referencing between people like Margaux that are testing the two, it might end up a world where the wines actually are completely different and they're more consumable younger, which I kind of think the audience now is yearning for in this world of scrolling
fast
and flicking
forward.
fast forward everything. Okay, interesting. So that's a good start. All wine gets better with age.
Myth. Next question.
I think we don't have to dwell too much on that one. But yeah, just a quick anecdote around that.
Well, I've had exactly that question, but as a statement, I've got a cellar full of all these wines that have been aging. I bought them at a deal in Tesco decades ago. I'm I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you that it's probably not they're not at their best. You've missed the boat on them, and so it's just a lot of maybe not a lot, but some consumers think that that's the case, and I think it's just worth reminding them that actually most wines are ready for drinking when they hit the market, and it's just a small percentage actually that are going to age. And it's also asking why age them? Is it because are they just holding, or are they really evolving to reach their full potential? And that's what is the point of aging them? Is to get to this beautiful next chapter of their lives. So I don't think I don't think enough people realize that actually.
I do agree. I completely agree with what Victoria's saying. I think there is a counterpoint to it, and I think in the area that me and you specialize in, there are certain wines I would wholeheartedly tell people not to even think about opening for the first 10 years. Like it's just you're just not considering
the point of that wine.
Exactly. And I think when it comes to that rarefied atmosphere of the top best wines made in the world, they do need to be given time. But completely agree. The vast majority of wine, to your point, like a great Gruner Veltliner, you want to just be able to pop and pour and get it open.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that, to be honest, that is a question we get asked quite a lot. Is when you're looking even back as far as the sort of early 2000s or maybe even like the late 90s for like we're talking the very top labels, of course, but are they still in the window? Are they over the hill? And I think you at that level you only have to have if you're lucky enough to have those experiences, you can be rest assured from good vintages that those wines will age on for decades. But it's about knowing which ones are going to do that, and maybe the ones from the Tesco meal deal aren't perhaps the right place to start for that. Another one here would be you can't pair red wine with fish.
Myth.
It depends what fish.
Interesting.
Depends what fish. I don't think you can pair any red wine with salmon. I've yet to see a good pairing.
Like a very pale, light chilled Pinot Noir? An Oregon or an English Pinot Noir that is almost like, is it maybe a dark rosé? You know what I mean? Like some.
But you're getting to the point, so it's almost kind of like not even a red wine.
But so my point is that you probably like a salmon. I think that's a great maybe like a roast salmon, like a baked salmon, and then a very pale light Pinot, like unoaked, like something.
But by that stage,
chilled.
You might as well just pair it with a white.
But it's a red. But I mean,
I think salmon is the most difficult. Like it genuinely is. I think that's a very difficult thing to pair with a red.
I was going to play mediator. I just immediately when I think salmon, I just think of that like the sort of the richness and the fatty content. I just feel like it has to be kind of a sharper white or maybe even a champagne.
The other one I find difficult, and it happens a lot with high-end Burgundy, is sushi.
Oh.
A lot of like high-end Burgundy
Just
tastings are red. Exactly. But you go and taste these I remember being in Singapore. We went to a really like one of the top sushi restaurants in Singapore and like open like crazy like Grand Cru Burgundies, like all the top names, and I just really struggle with that as a pairing. I just find it kind of the metallic flavor of the fish wines, with the even with like a light Pinot, but even like it just didn't work for me. I find that's kind of a hard pairing to make work on the fish side, like raw fish.
I would say that's probably right. I think maybe like a Chablis, like something that's either like lighter oak or no oak at all, right?
Yeah.
But if it's got like mallow or oak, any kind of richness, it's difficult to pair it with.
And then with like the ginger and the wasabi as well, and then you're like, oh, these flavors just don't make sense. So I think raw fish is a tough one with red.
Quite unique.
But I think raw sushi with champagne.
Yeah.
That's a great pairing. Yeah. That's a great pairing.
Yeah. I think it's quite a unique food stuff in that way because it's kind of like it's so many different things brought together to hit that point of kind of umami, isn't it? But I think sometimes just a cold beer maybe with sushi is the answer.
Or a sake.
Or a sake, yeah. Champagne must be expensive to be good.
Facts. Okay, what's expensive?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, good point.
Because you don't find champagnes less than 20 quid, right?
No.
And if you do, then that's not where you should spend your 20 quid.
Exactly. So then if people determine as wine as being expensive, being over 20, which I think generally most people will.
Yeah.
Most people, if you stop people on the high street and say it's over £20 for a wine expensive, they'll say yes.
Buying champagne, you should look at other regions that will deliver really well for £20, like the Crémonts.
Crémonts, I was going to say, yeah. I mean,
Cava even. I mean, again, they're not on the same, prestige level, but for 20 quid, which people.
That's my best advice to people whenever they're organising the bubbles for a wedding. It's always head for Crémont because it's just going to give you that value with the same.
Absolutely.
On like a on a big order.
So we're going fact on this.
So we're going fact then? First fact?
Yeah, let's do fact,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a nice change of pace. On topic.
Yeah.
Organic wine means no sulfites.
Well, no no, that doesn't mean that.
No,
yeah,
myth.
yeah,
Myth, another myth.
yeah.
It's more the natural wine.
Yeah.
Natural wine side of things.
Yeah, and even then, natural
But
wine
even then,
can
some have a
there's
little bit of sulfur.
There's a tolerance to it, yeah.
Maybe just because you're a wine educator and you've got such great knowledge, would you be able to? Because I know a lot of people are confused around sort of the terminology. Like, can you concisely summarize like your description of natural wine?
Well, no, actually, I can't. I don't think that it's not
so good luck to all you beginners out
there. it's not so easy to define, and if I simplify it too much, I feel like that takes away from.
But sulfur dioxide is kind of like one of the key components in terms of like, if someone adds 0, you would generally say they're 100% natural, right?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's look at it from a point of view like minimal. Okay, like if you think natural wine is in the ethos of like minimal intervention, and what is that? So like that 0 added, 0 taken away. So it's a lot more than just your use of sulfur. But even then, some natural wine producers will avoid it all the way through production. But if they're exporting their wine to America, to China, they will put a little bit at bottling, just at that bottling stage, to make sure it will make the journey. And I would still say that's a natural wine, even though they've gone and used sulfur. Yeah. So I don't think that means they're not natural. I just think that's
more like a transportation.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Make sure their product makes it to the destination. I just think again, it's like the philosophy. You have to really.
It's a preservative in a way, right? The addition of sulfide.
Exactly, and I don't think it's the enemy. I think you can still be in the natural wine world. I mean, maybe this is controversial to say, but like, and still use sulfur judiciously.
But sometimes, to your point, when you talk about natural wines, the people are either classified as like absolutely none or low.
Yeah.
That's where I see kind of like the spectrum. But people that have low, I would still consider as natural.
Definitely. Yeah, exactly. I think low is still fine.
Can I ask you another question? Can I add another one, wine fact or wine myth? Because it's tied to the same conversation, which is this. I think that okay. Do sulfites give you a headache or a hangover?
Not me personally, but I think some people have like a histamine issue with them. I think that's what's going on. I think sulfites got a really bad rap for it. I think that's what's going on. I think people have allergies to even tannin, to the kind of elements of the wine, but it's not necessarily sulfites. And as we know, sulfites are used throughout the food industry, right? So like fruit salads, dried fruit, salads that have been pre-made. The whole of M&S department, I think, is using sulfites.
The salad hangover. Yeah, I often struggle with.
So it's a wine myth, right?
Totally a myth.
But it did get a bad rep for a while.
Yeah,
people would like reference it.
Yeah, easy like excuse, but no.
I think it feels like it was almost paired in people's thinking to the fact it's. I find it as often now people say I don't like heavy reds, they give me a hangover. Well, generally speaking, heavier red means higher alcohol, and that makes sense. Yeah. That's going to give you the hangover more so than the additives. I thought maybe a good one to finish on. In fact, for fact or myth.
Gone.
This is a delicious wine.
Fact.
Yeah,
I have to say, I thought this is brilliant. Would you mind doing
Sure.
I mean, Victoria kindly brought this for us today, which has been the first time on the pod.
Yeah.
That's happened. So would you mind revealing?
Sure.
I'm slightly scared to guess.
Do you want our opinions on it before we?
Yeah, let's do that first.
Not to put you on the spot.
No,
at
exactly.
All. It's just to see like where does your mind go when you're tasting it?
Yeah.
Because I will tell you, when I first had it, I didn't know necessarily what it was. So, like, what does it remind you of anything you've had before?
Yeah, look, I think when I first tasted it, when we first came in, I think the one thing that struck me was how like juicy and fruity it was, and it's got this nice crunchiness to it as well on the mid palate. As you said, it's quite young, so there's obviously a bit of grip and tannins there. It's kind of like it's kind of medium to light bodied. It's not super dense or super heavy.
Might go well with salmon, actually.
Yeah, I don't know why, but in my head I was kind of like thinking. I was thinking, is it kind of this new wave of kind of I don't know. I don't know why I was in Grenache, like Grenache, maybe from a Spanish producer, because it had that juicy kind of ripe fruitiness, and then it had like a little bit of body, but it had like a lightness to it. So that's kind of like where I immediately started thinking, but I'm sure it's absolutely wrong.
You're really close, actually.
Okay, that's where that was what I was thinking.
I sort of thought my thinking was just everything Tom said: fresh, rounded, really delicious, like really like a scrumptious, like mouthfeel and everything. I just felt like kind of single grape varietal, but from a lesser known region. I was thinking more Italy, like off coast of Italy, maybe. But yeah, that would be my guess.
It is an old vine wine. It's a field blend of Tempranillo.
Right.
I think not Garnacha, but you were right because we are in Spain.
Yeah.
Bobal, even some varieties that are white. So Albio Mayor, Pirulis, and you're in Ribera del Duero.
Oh,
so
I was
this
going to
is
say
like
Ribera del Duero.
900 meters above sea level from a very old vine, a very old single vineyard. 647 bottles made of it, so it's so tiny. This is bottle 443. It was just a choice that I wanted to bring it because actually when I tasted it initially, I found a lot of black fruit and kind of smoky, and initially it started to take me into like Côte and Syrah, and I was like, wow, are we in Northern Rhone? But no, it's actually just really high altitude.
Spicy, wasn't it?
Very
Yeah,
spicy.
no, on the palate, it's spicy, yeah.
It's very spicy. It's like a little smoky. It's kind of lovely black and red fruit. And I love the wine. I love the region. But more importantly, I actually love the fact that it's very old vines. And it kind of brings in that heritage of the region as well. Because this was an area that was known for bulk wine in those times. But now it's probably the most like superstar region of Spain. Rioja and Ribera del Duero.
Well, the thing this reminded me of and why I went for Spain is it had, I think stylistically was similar to like Commando G. In terms of how like the flavor profile was kind of like, but I don't know, I just felt, because it's interesting, it is Tempranillo from old vines, because it doesn't feel super heavy on the palate. It has like a lightness to it.
It's
and that's
fresh,
why I was like, wait, it doesn't feel like it could be that from Spain. And that's why I went for Grenache, maybe like a lighter style of grape variety. It's really interesting though. I mean, it's beautifully well made.
Yeah, it's really lovely. Thank you so much for bringing that, because it was such a nice surprise, really.
How did you come across it?
It is a winery that I'm working with. It's a small, young winery, very passionate, dedicated. They are making incredible wines at high altitude, and actually they make, this is the first release of this particular wine. They do make other reds and a white Albio Mayor from Ribera del Duero, also a rosé and a kind of a chillable red. I think they're almost like the new next generation of Ribera del Duero. I really like them. And actually when Tim Atkin came out to visit them this summer, he selected this wine and one other wine, they're number 17. So he selected two of theirs in their like top Ribera del Duero report. Yeah. So it was really nice to see his kind of nod of approval as well, because they're doing really good stuff.
And what's their approach for élevage? Is it a lot of, not much oak, right?
Yeah, it's like used oak.
Second vintage.
Yeah, it's not at all like covered. No, absolutely. I love that too. It's like that next style of Ribera, because people think they know what to expect, but actually
that's what throws you off as well.
Massively.
Yeah,
I think elevation in reds at the moment is a big thing for me. That's where I sort of was thinking a little bit. I don't know, like Sicilian, like that kind of like higher altitude. It kind of gives that vibe.
It's the next frontier, isn't it?
Yeah,
like
I think so. Yeah,
altitude wines. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely delicious. So thank you for
sharing.
No, thank you very much. That was great. And for listeners at home, definitely recommend seeking that out, because I'd find it very hard for anyone not to enjoy that for the style that it is. Right, I think we've got time for just one last question.
From me to you.
So if you could design the perfect first wine experience for someone, starting their wine journey, thinking about the setting, bottle, atmosphere, what would it look like?
So the first interaction with wine for them? I mean, I would say it's always amazing when you're at the place that's making the wine. Like if you can, let's say you're on a holiday and you happen to be in a region that makes wine, is like do veer into a vineyard and see if you can taste there. And I would say that is a really special moment, because when you can connect the dots of how did that wine even get to you in the glass, like it's because someone's gone and made it and made a lot of life choices to like create that. So if you can, the sooner you can get yourself out to vineyards and travel, I think you will understand how special this industry is and how special this product is. If you can't travel, then obviously I would say with friends that also love wine, or maybe you can be the one to enthuse your friends, but always sharing a bottle, I think is the best way. It's not just by yourself, with other people that also could learn together.
Couldn't agree more. And alternatively, a wine bar in Montreal, of course, is the second best option.
Back then, I didn't even think of the label. I was just like, just coming to terms with it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us today.
Thank you both.
A really enjoyable episode.
I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much.
And absolutely no doubt that the listeners at home will have thoroughly enjoyed listening to your story, which is very impressive. So, look, we are rounding up for the year. As Jay mentioned, we're kind of marching towards Christmas. So we want to thank everyone who's supported and listened to the podcast so far. We are available on all your usual channels. So please make sure you subscribe, whether it's on Spotify, YouTube, of course. Like, subscribe. Please leave your comments. We do read your comments. Email them in. And we might even have another podcast in the future where we answer some of your listeners' questions. Alexa is actually shaking her head, so maybe we won't be doing that. Apologies. We've got a busy schedule. But look, have a fantastic end to the year. Thank you very much for supporting the podcast. It's one that we've really enjoyed making so far this year, and we're looking forward to 2026 and what else we can do. But as always, I've been your co-host, Tom Gearing, CEO of Côte Wines, and Jonathan has been the other co-host.
Yes. No, thank you all for listening. It's been great. I think this was a great way to round off the year. And really looking forward to where we can take things in 2026.
Thanks very much for listening, and remember to like and subscribe.